to welcome you to this event where we're going to be talking about institutional policy in higher education institutions in terms of gender equality. And we have a very nice program and a couple of super guests today. We have Dr. Valerie Imparato, who is Associate Vice Chancellor at University of Massachusetts, Boston, and the office they have for civil rights in Title IX. And she has been working there in several fields, including sexual harassment and gender-based policy and knowledge. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation and for joining us. We're very happy that you're here.
Thank you.
And we have Dr. Paulina Uribe Morfin. She is Deputy Director for Transversalization of University Policy in Gender Equity at the Coordinación para la Igualdad de Género en la Universidad, the SIGU at UNAM. And this is part of a series of activities and talks and events that UNAM organizes and holds for discussion throughout the year, but particularly around certain dates, and particularly in March. And so we're very happy to have the discussion today, hosted and organized by this office, by la Dirección General de Cooperación e Internacionalización, Centro de Enseñanza para Extranjeros, and particularly UMass Boston and UNAM Boston. We have our office at UMass. And Héctor Zavala, who is Deputy Director at UNAM Boston, is going to lead the discussion and moderate this. So I'm very happy to see you and to host this discussion. And Héctor, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to this panel on institutional policies for gender equality and higher education. Today, as Dr. Lee just said, we're very fortunate to have leaders from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, and the University of Massachusetts, Campus Boston, who are two universities committed to fostering inclusive and equitable environments. We believe gender equality is not only a matter of fairness, but also essential for academic excellence, well-being, and innovation. And yet the path for drafting policies to ensuring they truly transform campus culture is complex and requires sustained effort. In this conversation, we will explore how gender policies are developed, implemented, and monitored at our institutions. And we'll also hear about legal frameworks like the Title IX in the US and relevant Mexican regulations, as well as the creative strategies each campus has used to overcome challenges and build lasting change. So before we dive in our conversation, I would like to mention just a couple of sentences about our speakers today. First, we have Dr. Valerie Imparato. She's a civil rights attorney with over a decade of experience in areas such as international litigation, human rights, and anti-discrimination law. Valerie currently serves as the Associate Vice Chancellor for Civil Rights and Title IX at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, where she ensures compliance with federal and state gender equality regulations. Beyond her legal expertise, Valerie has lived around the world, speaks 5 languages, and enjoys creating art in her free time. Thank you very much, Valerie, for joining us today. Joining us from UNAM, we have Dr. Paulina Uribe Morfin. She is the Deputy Director of Transversalization of University Policies at UNAM, Head Office for Gender Equality. Paulina holds a PhD in education and has extensive academic background in anthropology, psychology, and sustainability. She's also a co-founder of civil organizations focused on educational environmental advocacy. Throughout her career, Paulina has been committed to advance gender equality through education, civil participation, and social movements. Thank you, Paulina, so much for joining us. And as we say in English, last but not least, we have Ruth Ruiz. She's a Mexican visual designer specializing in gender-sensitive communication, a graduate of UNAM's Design and Visual Communication program. She also holds a diploma in advertising communication and design for digital media. Since 2020, she has worked at UNAM's Head Office for Gender Equality, using graphic design to promote gender equality, prevent violence, and support institutional gender policies. Ruth has led training on gender-sensitive visual communications, contributed to key campaigns such as March 8th and Pride Month, and participates in research on feminist graphic design. Thank you, Ruth, for joining us today also. Well, thank you all of you for being here. It's so inspiring to see how your diverse experiences have shaped the important work you're leading at your universities. And I think this really sets the stage of our conversation today. So let's dive in. To get us started, I would like first to ask Valerie Imparato, if you can mention a little bit how does your institution approach the development on gender equality policies, and what are the legal frameworks, such as the Title IX? So if we can start with you for the first round, please, Valerie, go ahead.
Sure, and thank you so much, everyone, for having me. I'm sorry that my Spanish is not better. I used to be really good in Spanish. I used to work in Spanish, and then I married an Italian. So now every time I try to speak Spanish, Italian comes out. But I understand everything. So if anybody needs to switch to Spanish, no worries at all. So in the US, there's kind of a really interesting framework when we're talking about gender equality, especially in the realm of higher education. And the reason for that is you kind of have this federal framework, which is Title IX. And then you have the state framework, right? Which is from state to state that has the legal mandates in that particular state. And then beyond that, you have the policies that you as a university will implement. As a public university, obviously we've got kind of special responsibilities as far as being really close to the letter of the law, both state-wise and on the federal level. The really interesting thing about Title IX on the federal level is it's 37 words. It's really simple. All it says is no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program actively receiving federal financial assistance. So that's super simple. And yet you got hundreds and hundreds of pages of interpretation of what that means, depending on who the administration is at the time. So for us, because Title IX tends to be very political in its interpretation, it kind of changes every 4 years, depending on who the president is at the time. So Title IX under the Biden administration looks very different than Title IX under the Trump administration because of the interpretation of those 37 words. Our office, Boston is located in the state of Massachusetts. And then so Massachusetts state has its own kind of very robust and specific laws and regulations around what gender equity looks like in the state of Massachusetts. So you're really kind of juggling all of these pieces when you're implementing gender equity as an attorney at a university in the US. And then on top of that, regardless of what the law says, right, what are the extra protections that we want to make sure we have in place for our students? And then the big question that's going on in the US right now is, does gender equity include transgender rights, right? Does gender equity include sexual orientation, right? When we say on the basis of sex in Title IX, well, what does that really mean? And different administrations will have different answers for that. So that's kind of some of the landscape, if that answers your question, Héctor, of what we're juggling. And then, I'm sure as we'll talk more specifics about what that looks like, but those are really the frameworks: federal, state level, and then as an institution, are there extra policies that you want to implement to keep our students safe when we're legally allowed to do so?
Well, thank you very much, Valerie, for this framework. And before giving the word to Paulina and Ruth, I would like to ask you to what extent you must follow to this Title IX. So what do you do in your office? How do you communicate? How does UMass Boston educate the campus community about their rights and responsibilities under this law? Are they aware? Do they know where to go if they have any issue regarding Title IX? How do you reach out to students and also faculty and staff if you work for all of them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have huge kind of education campaigns. We have training year round for faculty and staff, students as well. There's kind of separate additional training that student athletes have to have because of some of the laws around sexual harassment and athletics in the United States. So, and then whenever there's a legal change in Title IX, like there recently was, with the switch of the administration, we send out emails about that, explaining the the change. We do online training that's mandatory for certain groups, and that is campus-wide. We have posters, we've got kind of like television advertisements throughout campus. So Title IX and gender equity, it's something that's really important at UMass Boston, and I'll say in the US. There's a pretty robust and specific legal framework, even about who you have to train, how often you have to train them, right? All of those kinds of things are kind of legally prescribed. And so we do have throughout the year trainings for our entire campus community. And that training, it includes where you go, what Title IX is, right? What is and is not considered sexual harassment? What is sexual violence under the university's policies? What does consent mean under the university's policies, as opposed to consent in the criminal legal system? Because that's all educational framework for students, faculty, and staff around all of those things. And we've got kind of like marketing campaigns is what I would call it, that we have throughout with flyers, posters. There's posters all over campus that are like, know your rights. Here are some examples. And then there's my name, there's my phone number. Here's where you go if you're a student. Here's where you go if you're a faculty or a staff member. So we really try to push that, because your rights aren't very useful if you don't know about them, right? So that is definitely something that's part of my job and part of my role.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Well, now, Paulina and Ruth, I would like to ask the same question. How does the SIGU, the Head Office for Gender Equality, applies the policies in terms of gender equity? If you can also share some relevant Mexican legislations, if there is something like nationwide, like similar to Title IX that the higher education institutions usually follows, and perhaps what role does the UNAM Gender Office play, or what are the specific committees so we can apply these gender equality pledges throughout the university? We all know UNAM is a huge university where 360,000 plus students, 4,000 plus faculty members. So how do you make sure that everybody in the university knows about the gender politics at UNAM? And perhaps if you can talk about the CNICs, the specific commissions of gender equality that every entity, school, department, institute of UNAM has. This is for you to know, Valerie, one CNIC, the Internal Commission on Gender Equality of the Head Office for International Affairs of UNAM, and there are many, many others throughout the university. So Paulina and Ruth, if you want to share some insights.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing this space with us. And thank you to Valerie to explain the framework in US and UMass. And for us, for UNAM and for Mexico, we have a federal framework, which is the General Education Law, and also the Women Life Free of Violence Law, which apply for UNAM because we are a public university. So we organize all our actions and all our communication to support that, to create a space and frameworks that the people at the university can live a life free of violence. So at UNAM, gender equality is a fundamental commitment, and efforts to incorporate a gender perspective are reflected in various areas of the university, including governance, violence prevention, education, and institutional policies. So one of the key aspects is achieve gender parity in decision-making, in making bodies such as the governing boards, university council, rectory staff, collegiate bodies, and principals officers. So to address gender-based violence, the Defender of University Rights, Equality, and Attention to Gender Violence provide essential supports, ensuring that cases are handled with sensitivity and efficiency. And the other side, SIGU, the coordinator we are working on, we are on the educational and prevention and communication issues. So in academia, gender mainstream is integrated throughout seminars, courses, certifications, research centers, and postgraduate programs. And additional regulatory change, including guidelines, the general statutes and protocols for handling gender-based violence, reinforce the institutional commitment to gender equality. So the creation of SIGU, that we call ourselves SIGU, was on March 2. So today we are we have 5 years old. So we born in March 2, 2020. So UNAM officially established the Coordination of Gender Equality, SIGU, through an agreement published at the Gaceta UNAM. And SIGU is responsible for designing, implementing, and operating institutional policies that foster gender equality across the university entities. As an executive body under the Rectorate, SIGU works transversally within university secretaries, coordinators, and departments to embed gender equality within institutional frameworks. SIGU is part of a broader institutional structure that includes the Rectory, General Secretariat, and several key offices, such as the Administrative Secretariat, Institutional Development Secretariat, and Cultural Diffusion Coordinator, among others. This integration ensures a cohesive approach to gender equality across the university. So UNAM gender equality strategies is structured around 2 transversal axes, one of which is gender equality itself. This strategy is further guided by 7 key axes, including the vision of an inclusive university and a strong institutional commitment to gender equality. Within 49 programmatic lines related to gender equality, the university is advocating concrete action to make this vision reality. Of course, we have a lot of challenge every day, and in this country, violence is something that is normalized. So we had to work hard on communication strategies every day. So Ruth she's gonna talk about our goals and our work access, and how we do all these strategies around 7 lines of work that we have in SIGU.
Hi, everyone. Sorry. Yeah, I'm gonna take over to talk about goals and work access that we have at SIGU. SIGU focuses on developing and implementing institutional policies for violence prevention and gender equality promotion, fostering a culture of respect, inclusion, and substantive equality within the university community. That means mainstreaming gender perspective in teaching, research, and cultural activities, establishing innovative models for gender equality that serve as a national reference. We know that at the university, we have a commitment to be a reference to all of the other schools. So we take very seriously the innovative part of creating models for gender equality. To achieve these goals, SIGU operates across several work axes. The first one is the one where Paulina is deputy, which is transversalization university policies, which means strengthening gender equality commissions, which is the CENIC that every space in our university has, and they take care of making local efforts to transversalize gender equality in their specific needs within academic and administrative entities. Community management and violence eradication, which means training and supporting guidance community persons, which are called POC, who provide first contact assistance in cases of gender violence. These are gonna be persons that are in every entity that will be trained by SIGU and have this first contact training, which come very hand in hand when it comes to gender violence and what they can do within the university. Then we have our comprehensive work with men, which promotes awareness, training, and intervention focused on gender equality. This is very important for us because we know men are very important in gender equality. So we have a specialized program that works with them in their entities. So we have a lot of activities and information within this. Then we have our legal counsel, which ensures that gender policies comply with university regulations and national and international legal frameworks. We know that as a university, we have a lot of diverse persons, such as even minors. So we have to be very careful with the way in which we handle all of these gender violence cases. So that's why it's very important to have a legal counsel. Then we have equality and non-discrimination policies that establish care spaces, supporting sexual and gender diversity and promoting women's participation in STEM fields. We know that UNAM has a very important STEM field. So we're focusing on promoting women's participation in these spaces, because even in 2024, like even last year, we have spaces where women are the minority. So we're trying to establish and support these women and how they participate and how they take care of them in these spaces. Then we have gender equality in research, which is very, that goes with like the non-discrimination policies. We ensure academic selection and evaluation policies that incorporate principles of equality, interculturality, and intersectionality. These three things are very important because we know that our context is very important. So that's why we have to take care of this with very special care. Then we have gender equality and women in STEM, where we try to expand participation of women and historically discriminated groups in disciplines and spaces where their presence has been limited. Education and awareness for equality, where we integrate gender perspective into curriculum and fostering critical reflection on gender equality. Then we have communication and culture for equality, where we democratize information through media initiatives such as La Boletina, Violeta y Oro, which is our radio program, and Miércoles para la Igualdad, which is our reflection spaces, where we take topics that are very in the agenda right now. So we try to take down this information so it can go to all of the spaces in the university. Then we have assessment and statistics, where we develop indicators and analyses to track gender inequality and support all of SIGU's initiatives. And networking and collaboration, where we engage with national and international institutions to strengthen gender equality and efforts. At the end, SIGU is a commitment to the future. Through its various programs, policies, and collaborative efforts, UNAM continues to advance in gender equality, creating a more inclusive, respectful, and equitable academic community for all of us.
Thank you very much, Ruth and Paulina. I think we all learned a lot about both UMass Boston and UNAM gender policies. As you all know, we have an MOU between UNAM and UMass Boston, and that's why the UNAM's office is located in the main library of UMass. So I think there is a lot of room to exchange more ideas, and let's see how can we share best practices between our universities, no? So I have another question for you. Well, no, both our universities are incredibly diverse, right? UMass Boston is the third most diverse university in the country, in the US, and UNAM welcomes hundreds of international students every year. So with that in mind, what kind of cultural challenges have you encountered in promoting gender equality, and how have you worked to address them? Also, how do you ensure your approach to gender equality is inclusive of the wide range of backgrounds and identities represented in our campuses? For example, in Mexico, we kiss a lot, But for example, if there is a Muslim female student, it's unthinkable to greet with a kiss, right? So how do you have faced these challenges? And maybe we can start with Valerie.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Héctor. And we, deal with that a lot. As you said, we're a really diverse university. We have a lot of international students. And I'll say for myself, like the kissing example, I'm not originally American. When I went to college in the US at NYU, I was like kissing everyone on the cheek, and that was not the thing. So I learned really quickly that, that's not how it worked in the American context. I think that one thing that's really, really hard when we're talking about the cultural aspect is finding the balance between, as part of education, right, as a university, educating the students on the norms of the place where they are, right, and respecting the home cultures that they come from and the cultures that they come with. And so there's the American culture, but then on top of that, there's the New England culture that is, for lack of better word, very cold compared to a lot of cultures in South America, a lot of cultures in Africa, a lot of cultures in the Caribbean where I'm from. And so a lot of what it is prevention education and explaining to students when they first get here, and faculty and staff, right, as part of the training, what are the norms, what is considered acceptable, what could be viewed as sexual harassment in the US, right? Completely apart from intent. So what we talk a lot about is intent versus impact, right? Your intent may have nothing sexual behind it. Your intent may have nothing to make other people uncomfortable. There's lots of countries where you kiss women on the cheek and you don't kiss men on the cheek, right? Including in a professional environment. You may come from a different place and come with the intent of that's just how you greet people. And it may be seen as treating people of a certain gender differently than others, right? And they may be seen as inappropriate. So a lot of our training, a lot of our prevention education is around intent versus impact, and the understanding that you're coming to work or you're coming to school within a certain context. And so without any judgment of what context is better or more appropriate, having an understanding of, well, if you're coming to the US and you're coming to New England, these are the expectations, and these are the things that can be viewed as sexual harassment or can be viewed as gender inequality, right? Regardless of what your intent is when you're doing them. And so it's really about empowering people to be successful in the context that they're in without any judgment of the context that they're from, right? And I can say that being from a context that is very different than the context that I'm in and having to adapt to that. I think on the other hand of that, especially when we're talking about, lower level things like kisses on the cheek, right? We're not talking about gender violence, which is unacceptable wherever you're from, but kind of those softer things, also educating people on the other side of it, right? When we're not talking about a formal investigation, we're not talking about something that rises to the level of a policy violation, informing people on the other side, well, we're talking about a different cultural context, and this is why this person may have acted in X, Y, and Z way. And we are talking to this person around what the context is in here, but just for you to understand, people are coming from a different cultural context. So, I think that one of the reasons that people come to UMass Boston is the richness and diversity in every sense of the word, right? Racially, gender-wise, sexual orientation-wise, national origin-wise, that is something that attracts people to our university. And so we want to keep that richness while also respecting the law and empowering people to be successful when they come here.
Thanks so much. So interesting to hear about that. And I've experienced myself. I tried to kiss a couple of colleagues when I just came. I said, okay, whoa. I'm okay, I'm so sorry. I'm not going to do that anymore. Paulina, please, or Ruth, if you can share a little bit of the UNAM perspective on this.
Yes, we have a very different context and a different challenge. But for example, the challenge that we face at UNAM and throughout the country is the use of inclusive language, because it must transform a culture of discrimination and machismo. So normally people who are in a machista culture respond to the inclusive language with rejection or mockery, or it's funny or it's ridiculous. So our communication strategies must be very intelligent and very sensitive to this. So we work on that every day through our social network communication, but also in all the capacitation that we do with teachers and staff at the university. So another challenge is this normalized violence, to open a space for that dialogue where we can all reflect how we have internalized violence and why it is so normalized in Mexico. So it is in this regard, the internal commissions that the one here at UNAM Boston are a clue. They are a clue, and they are playing a very important role by organizing different awareness raisings or training activities for the people in their spaces. So they know the community and they know how to do these strategies. So they play a very important role. So since violence is so normalized, one other challenge that we face is to create a culture of denunciation that it's safe for women to do that. So because when they do this denunciation, they became like a dangerous woman at the university. So we have to change that. So we work also in the important to fight for our rights at the university also.
Yeah, relating a little bit to what Valerie was saying, I think what we also try to do from SIGU is like giving this like very easy, like pointers for all of the people that interact with each other, such as teachers and students. Like we want to tell teachers, like, these are the things that you can do, but there's also these things that you can do because you have like a kind of power structure within you being the teacher and students, no? So we want to tell them like, yeah, it's fine if you like joke with your students and stuff, but you cannot ask them to go for a cup of coffee after school. So we want to be very like straight to the point that you're a teacher and you have to take that responsibility as a teacher. And for students, we also want to tell them what their rights are. So we want to tell them, if you're not feeling comfortable, you can do this and this and this. And if you are a trans folk and you want to like change your name and your pronouns, that's fine. You can do this and this and this. So we want to, from SIGU, we want to tell them what your rights are. So it's kind of like tell everyone what their rights are, what their responsibilities are. And that's very important to, like identify violence from the very first time it appears. Because if we don't name violence from the beginning, it's gonna keep on getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And what we want from SIGU is prevention and stop violence before it gets too big and we have to deal with other ugly things that still happen, but we want to prevent them.
Thanks so much. I'm going to have one last question before opening up to the audience here. So I wanted to mention, since the COVID-19 pandemic, universities around the world, including UMass and UNAM, have shifted to remote and hybrid models of work and study, change that we have now become a lasting part of higher education, right? So in this new reality, how has the transition to online and hybrid environments impacted the enforcement or adaptation of gender equality policies, in this case, UMass and UNAM? Have you faced any challenges such as balancing work and caregiving responsibilities, ensuring digital accessibility, addressing online harassment, or perhaps supporting the mental health of students, faculty, and staff? That was a big deal during pandemic, particularly women and gender diverse individuals who may experience these pressures more than others, right? On another hand, maybe have these new models created opportunities to advance gender equity in ways that weren't possible before? I don't know, Valerie, if you want to mention something.
Oh my gosh, all of it. I could talk about this forever. We faced every single one of the challenges that you mentioned. So, you know, one of the big things that you see kind of like as a new realm since COVID is online harassment, and that being the purview of the university in a way that I think maybe it wasn't before, right? And for us, there are different regulations around our responsibilities around behavior that's considered on campus versus behavior that's not on campus. But what does on campus mean, like on a computer? What does on campus mean on Instagram? What does on campus mean on Snapchat, right? Which is like the world in which these students live. So a lot of it, you know, has been navigating that legal framework of what falls under our jurisdiction when it's online harassment versus what doesn't. That includes things like so-and-so said this really offensive thing on Twitter, and you're telling the university about it, and we're like, this is really offensive, but is this our jurisdiction? Is this our place, right? Versus direct harassment. So that's something that we've dealt with. We've also really dealt with the mental health aspects that you mentioned, right? Our students, we've got like a whole generation of students that spent part of high school at home, like a significant part of high school at home. And then they're now in the university context away from their parents for the first time. You know, another really big thing that I think that people don't think about in the US versus the international context, I cannot say enough how much of a difference it makes in this context when the drinking age at the US is 21 and the drinking age in lots of other places in the world is 18. And so what that means is you've got students who are away from their parents for the first time, who go to college and are binge drinking. And, you know, even though they're legally not supposed to, but like in my experience in other contexts, kids start drinking in high school, right? Here, a lot of times kids start drinking in college for the first time when they're away from their parents. And so you can imagine kind of the sexual violence aspect that can come in when you add drugs and alcohol, also being away from home for the first time. And the cultural kind of independence starts for us at 18 in a way that in Europe, South America, independence starts earlier for you guys. So you've had practice at home in a safe space before you come into the world and are on other people. So that's exacerbated with COVID, obviously, and then people being in the university context for the first time there. I will say, you know, and that it impacts everyone, but you know, when people have other things going on, that impacts them more. I would say on the other hand of that, I've seen a huge kind of shift in caretaking responsibilities. I would say less on the student side, but just even the faculty and staff side. Now that you have this hybrid environment and people are working from home, you know, the idea that you can throw a load of laundry in between meetings, that is on its face a genderless thing. But because in the US, women do tend to take on more of the domestic responsibilities, right? The way they do in lots of other cultures, this hybrid environment has really revolutionized the ability for women to work and still get a lot of kind of domestic responsibilities done when you are in a household where both partners are working, right? But now you can work, you can advance your career, you can make lunch for the kid and throw a load of laundry in and still have meetings all day and still be doing your work in a way that you couldn't do before. And so I do think that just culturally, that hybrid work environment is probably a good thing for women who tend to be, you know, still doing a lot of the domestic load of work, even though they're also, you know, full-time, even when they're also full-time professionals, right? So we've seen a lot of it from coming back from COVID. I think also coming back from COVID, we've seen a lot of on the student side, an increase in, I don't know if we've seen an increase in students who are autistic, but we've seen an increase in students who seek accommodations on the autism side of things. And then that also in our field lends to like, well, how do you deal with stalking, or sexual harassment or those kinds of things, when there's also an element of perhaps there's neurodivergence and a lack of understanding of social cues that was reinforced by the fact that these kids were home from 16 to 18, right? And weren't interacting. And now they are. And then maybe you also have some neurodivergence going on where you don't really pick up on the I'm not interested cues unless somebody tells you like, stay away from me, right? And so that kind of stuff will come to our office as well. So it's really changed the landscape. It's really changed the landscape of accessibility and reasonable accommodations, right? How do you tell somebody that they have to come do their job in person when they've been doing it from home for 2 years? And then perhaps that helped with their disability and they have a disability and they're realizing like, hey, I don't want to do this on campus anymore. I want to do this from home. But of course it's different because now everybody's back on campus, right? So you're doing a different job than you did when everybody was home. So I could talk about this forever. I want to leave space for Paulina and for Ruth to talk about that in the UNAM context, but certainly, I mean, COVID has changed everything on its head, from mental health to accessibility to online harassment to sexual violence response. And it's something we're all dealing with in every area of our university.
Thanks so much, Valerie. I agree with you. We should have a session only about that so we can talk more and more. So Paulina, Ruth, please.
Yeah, thank you. And I also want to say that the discrimination experience at UNAM also has to do with gender stereotypes and the work that women and men are expected to do within the university and also at home. So this separation between roles worsened during pandemic, and it continued to be ignored that women generally work two days work, so 2 journals works at home and at the university. So this is because traditional gender roles have favored men to doing care work at home or doing very little. So their time and their levels of efficiency in academic is granted, and not necessarily because they are smarter or more qualified, but because they have more time. So therefore, we carried out a campaign in October about the month of care to recognize this domestic work and also to get men involved in this domestic work. But it's easy to do that, but we have to do it at the university because we are committed to education. And another problem that increased during the pandemic period, precisely because of the increase of the use of social network, was digital violence. So we have to prepare special materials to teach how to detect it, and also that women can navigate at the network more safely. And in Mexico, we have the Olympia law, which is great support for for the right. However, we have many girls in this problem, and this law is only for adults. So we also have to work in this area, which is a huge challenge, not also for us, it's around the world. And we have to prepare more materials and more campaigns about this.
Yeah, I was also gonna mention October, our month of care, because we believe from SIGU that there's like a triangle of care that we should take care from university, which is taking care of yourself, taking care of others, and you know, like taking care of the things that you do or the things that you have to do for university. So from SIGU, we have created this campaign, which is safe spaces, where you can in the university get to places where you can get care, you know, because we have in women this double work that we do in the house and in the university or the work. So we have to, from university, do our best effort to try to conceal this inequity in women and men. That's why we have working the comprehensive work with men program and the space care program working together, because we need that effort from everyone in our community, so we can conceal this violence that's happening inside our university. So that's very important, and we invite you all to, in October, see all the things that we do from SIGU to try to conceal, because we know it's very local too. Like we know, with medics, it's very different that with, I don't know, artists or scientists. And so we have to make it very local in the spaces, because we are, it's 2025 and we're lacking spaces for moms to have time with their babies. So you have to think of that and think that this is a university so diverse and so big that we need those spaces, and it's urgent. So talking about that, and that in COVID, we have, they're asking us to come back to our workspaces and our study spaces, but we don't have those things we have at home. So then what is the university doing so we can come back and be happy and be satisfied with what the university is giving to us? So that's how I see it with COVID, that we got the chance to experience work in a space where we feel comfortable and where we feel like we have everything we need. So that's like a space that opened for university to take a look around and say, well, I think we're missing some spaces for people to feel comfortable. So I think that's what COVID did with all of these care spaces and looking for necessities our students and all of our community needs.
Well, thank you, Ruth, Paulina, Valerie, for your insightful discussion. And I would love to open up for the floor for questions from the audience. We have still like 10 minutes, so feel free to raise your hand or submit the question in the chat. So to follow up to what Ruth was saying, I have one here, and Liz asks, what maternity policies do you have for faculty, staff, or students in both UMass and UNAM? And I'm going to read the other one from Jessica Pinteiro, who says, could you give some specific recommendations that we can implement at the UNAM International Office considering our social context? So Valerie, if you want to start.
Sure. So for faculty and staff, it's super easy because we have federal and state laws mandating it. So you need to have, I believe, I want to make sure that it's correct. It's at least 6 to 8 weeks medical leave when you give birth, plus 12 weeks bonding time with the baby. The bonding time is for both parents. So it's not just for the birthing parent, but medical leave, you get 6 to 8 weeks. The important part is you get 6 to 8 weeks or whatever your doctor says. So you could have a doctor that says like, you need 14 weeks medical leave. And then on top of that, regardless of that, the 12 weeks is additional. So, that kind of shapes around to, woman giving birth, it shapes up to around 5 months of medical leave paid in the state of Massachusetts. All of that is paid. And it could be more if your doctor is, saying certain medical leave. It's funny, like, it just depends what context you're from, whether that's a lot or not. My husband being European, they're like, you get 2 years paid, and the government, just like gives you 2 years and free daycare and all of these things. And I'm like, let's move to Europe. But in other places, there are other states in the US where you don't get anything, and there's no federal requirement. There is no federal requirement in the US that you get any time off paid. So while there is federal requirement for birthing people that you get time off and that you get your job back after you give birth, they don't have to pay you during that time. So depending what your job is, obviously that's not practical for some people, but UMass Boston has great maternity leave policies for employees and staff. And then that's on top of pregnancy accommodations that you can get while you are pregnant. You also get lactation spaces by law. So there are 2 lactation spaces at UMass Boston. You are legally required to give a reasonable amount of time to your employees to go pump milk if they need to, or if they can somehow bring that baby to, to work every couple of hours and nurse the baby at work every couple of hours. They need to be given a reasonable amount of time to do that. So there's a robust legal framework. It is a little bit different for students. On the student front, you need to give them appropriate medical leave once they've given birth, the same way that you would give anybody appropriate medical leave, right? Birth is considered a medical event. And you need to work with the student to make sure that they're then able to pick up their classes the way that they would have, and be able to pick those back up. We've got a lot of pregnancy accommodations, hybrid accommodations. You cannot tell a student that they have to take leave, which can be a problem, right? Like infantilizing a woman and then forcing her to kind of put her education on the back burner because you think she needs leave, right? So it needs to come from the person that they want to take the leave and how much leave that they want to take. So I would say we've got a good framework both on the student side and the faculty and staff side. It is a little bit more difficult for students because there's less of a legal framework around what does that look like. But there are offices that you go to get those accommodations and to know what your rights are around those things.
Yeah, at UNAM, we don't have by law any with spaces and stuff. We only have by law time you get that are 84 days, which is very little actually. And for that, for example, we have something like 2 weeks or something. Sometimes they're days. So we can also see how gender gets through these things, So at UNAM, with the program we have of care spaces, we're trying to open up more lactation spaces for moms or even for dads. We're also fighting so these spaces are not exclusively for women, so dads can take care of their babies too, because sometimes they're very for women and they're pink and they only have for if you have pump milk and stuff. So we want to work towards giving this space for dads too. At UNAM, only if you're part of UNAM, you can access to these spaces where they take care of your child, but it only applies to certain hours. You can drop them off at 8 a.m. and you have to pick them up at 3 p.m. But we get off work at 5 or 6. So these times are very weird for moms because it gets very personal. So you have to talk to your boss. And if your boss is a nice person, then you can bring your child to work or you can go home. But if your boss is not a good person, then you have to figure it out. So that's very bad for, how it works at UNAM. And also what Valerie was saying about the difference between students and administratives and teachers, that's also very weird because at university and postgraduates, we do have these spaces for babies and moms. But when it comes to high school, it's weird because if you want to put anything that relates to motherhood, then you get criticized because you're kind of accepting teenage pregnancies. So it's very weird because one, you want to give these commodities to even teenage mothers, no? These babies and these mothers deserve these spaces and deserve to have this space with their babies, but you don't want to, say, yes, teenage pregnancies. So it's very weird. We're working towards having these spaces in high schools too, because they're necessary. We are not going to stop teenage pregnancies just by not giving them these respectful spaces. So it's very weird when it comes to, motherhood and working, because in Mexico, it also, when you have a child, it means you're not gonna have enough time because you have to take care of them. So having a child, it also means for women that, you know, you're gonna get less work, you're gonna get picked less. So it's everything that comes together when it comes to, you know, like motherhood and maternity leave and stuff, because you leave for maternity and everything is still happening at work. So when you reincorporate, you're behind. So I think more than working, like we have to work at the same time with accommodations for mothers and babies, and also for these things to not take a toll on women's working careers.
I will just say really quickly, Héctor, before we move on to Ruth's point, there's a really big difference in the US between the protections given to pregnant women and maternity leave and childcare. Like there's no required childcare, there's no daycare at UMass Boston. I think there used to be at a certain point, but now there's not. And so like, yeah, like I have a 3-year-old and you have to figure out with your partner, if you have one, who's dropping the kid off at daycare. We pay for daycare, right? Who's picking the kid up, and you have to figure that out with your work. And as you were talking about, Ruth, depending on the context that you're in and like the expectations around gender roles, that might fall a lot more on women, and that will naturally have an impact on your career if you're the one always leaving work early to go pick the kid up from school and your husband's not. Right. So that's also, I mean, you don't have those legal protections. You have to negotiate it within the couple. And then that's where the cultural aspects come into it.
Yeah, that's Valerie mentioned is the same for in Mexico. It's different that maternity leave and daycares. And for the students, in the case of the graduate students, it is more complicated also because they are tied to a scholarship and they cannot leave their studies and they cannot leave maternity. So they have to do both at the same time. So that's why it's important to that tutors and directors are sensitive to the issue, since there is no regulation and these permits are at the discretion of the authorities of each entity. The internal council of each entity could create agreements. They could. It's not forbidden, so they could do it and put them into effect. But many times we found resistance in create these opportunities for equity. And this is why training in equality or gender perspective is very important.
Okay, super. I think unfortunately we're running out of time, but we have one last question in the chat. If we can answer very quickly so we can finish almost on time. So David says, what policies apply when gender violence comes from another woman? So how can sorority be spread institutionally so violence and inequality does not come from the same gender and to other gender minorities? I don't know if you have one minute of thoughts.
David, that's a great question. I'm so glad that you asked it as the last question. There is no distinction for us between who the perpetrator is. One thing that's severely under-discussed and underreported is violence against men. Like sexual violence, gender violence goes both ways. So our policies, regardless of whether it's a woman against a woman, a man against a man against a woman, non-binary person against, like we've seen it all, and the same policies apply. You get sanctioned equally. So, you know, we do know obviously gender violence generally in the sense is something that really has been focused on women for a lot of reasons, but it's the policies and the laws apply to everybody equally.
Yeah, it's true. Gender violence can also come from another woman, and the same awareness criteria apply because we have all been created in the same environment of violence and discrimination. So that is why I mentioned it at the beginning that it's very important to know our own violence to reflect in our own violence and to change that. We don't need to an institution or another person to say, hey, this is not right. So we can reflect on that. So, and we can talk in each other in our communities about the problems that we have. So that's important to create safe environments at the university to talk about that and to try to find some solutions, because this is a problem for all of us. So, and all of us, we have to solve it.
Thank you, Paulina. Well, unfortunately, time flies, so we need to close our session, and I don't want to keep you more, just to ask Dr. Lee if he would like to say the closing remarks as the head of the International Head Office and the president of the Internal Commission of Gender Equality of the International Office of UNAM. Please.
Thank you, Héctor. Thank you, colleagues. I would just like to thank all of you for being here and for your time. Thank Valerie and Paulina for their presentations and all of our colleagues. This is obviously a very important issue that is at the center of many things that we need to do, no matter what other people may say in certain positions. But this is a basic thing that we need to do as universities and as people, to make sure that everybody has access to opportunities and to respect in a proper life. And this is at the heart of that. So I would like to thank all of you for attending. I would like to thank Héctor for his help in organizing this, and the entire team and the entire committee. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Paulina. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you. Gracias.